Damien Vescari was supposed to be downtown until morning, smiling at men who mistook paperwork for protection. Instead, his sedan rolled through the Lake Forest gates before midnight, and the iron bars closed behind him with a sound that felt wrong. No patrol by the fountain, no radio chatter in his earpiece. The driveway lights were on, but the house looked asleep in a way that made his instincts tighten. Damien stepped out before the engine fully died and studied the front doors. Unlocked. He entered without a word to his driver. The foyer smelled of lemon polish, then something metallic underneath, faint and cold. A cleaning cart stood crooked near the staircase, like someone had abandoned it mid-turn. One of the security cameras above the runner faced slightly toward the wall, a polite blindfold. A soft scrape came from the hall, careful wheels on marble. Rena Cole, the new maid, appeared at the end of the corridor. Black uniform, white collar, hair pinned tight. Her face was too pale, eyes too bright, as if she had been holding her breath for hours. When she saw Damien, relief flickered and vanished. She moved quickly across the distance and caught his wrist before he could speak. "Stay silent," she mouthed. Damien froze. In 12 years of running Chicago, nobody had ordered him in his own house and lived to repeat it. Yet Rena was not challenging him. She was warning him. Her fingers were cold. Her gaze was steady and terrified at the same time. She lifted one finger and pointed toward the ceiling corner above the coat closet. A tiny red light blinked on the intercom panel. Active line. Someone was listening. Damien touched his earpiece. Static. The internal comms were jammed. Rena slid a folded note into his palm and closed his fingers around it like she was sealing a door. Damien read it once. Study. 2 men. Your mother. Gun. Do not let them hear you. His blood cooled. His mother, Bianca, was supposed to be behind a keypad wing with 4 guards. Nobody reached her without permission, unless his guards were down, unless the keypad had been disabled, unless someone inside the house was guiding the knife. Damien did not speak. He nodded once at Rena, a question without sound. She turned her cart and guided him into a service corridor hidden behind decorative wood panels. The air back there smelled of bleach and damp linen. A guard lay on the floor near the laundry door with zip ties around his wrists. Another sat slumped against the wall, eyes unfocused, swelling at his temple. Rena knelt and checked their pulses with shaking hands. Alive. Damien removed the first guard's keycard and suppressed pistol. He kept his movements controlled because anger was loud, and loud was what the trap wanted. Rena pointed to a narrow vent grate set into the service wall. Through the grate, Damien could see the main hallway and the study door ajar. Warm light spilled across the runner. Voices carried clearly enough to make his stomach twist. Victor Harlan, his chief financial officer, polished voice, familiar voice. "Mrs. Vescari," he said, guiding her like she was a document. "Sign the transfer and we keep the company stable. Your son is unstable. We are protecting you." Damien's jaw clenched. A second voice answered, rougher and colder. Thomas Rourke, Damien personal security chief, the man who had called Damien brother in private and boss in public. "When he comes in," Rourke said, "shoot him quick." "Then we tell the cops he forced entry. He always checks on her first. He always walks right into the room." A soft sob followed. Bianca, Damien mother. A sound that did not belong in his house. Rena gripped Damien's sleeve and shook her head. "If you step out," her eyes said, "he kills you before you take a breath." Damien stared through the vent at the scene. He could not change with fury. Victor leaned over Bianca with a folder. Rourke stood near the door, gun angled toward the hall, waiting for Damien Habit to deliver him. It was a trap built from routine and trust. Damien pulled his phone and typed one word to Marco De Luca, his external head of security who was off-site tonight. Now. A new sound came from outside, distant but unmistakable. The front gate opening again, the jam in his earpiece weakened by a fraction. Marco's voice crackled in. "Boss, I'm inside the perimeter. 30 seconds to restore comms." Damien replied in a whisper. 10. Rena pointed to a recessed cabinet behind a painting. The door was ajar. Wires were clipped with precision. A small black jammer box blinked red like a heartbeat. Damien ripped it free and crushed it under his heel. Radios came alive at once in a chorus of whispers and urgent confirmations. In the study, Rourke stiffened. Victor stopped talking mid-sentence. Bianca lifted her head, eyes wide, hope and terror mixed. Damien took a breath and stepped out of the service corridor into the open hallway, walking as if he belonged there, because he did. The trap had been built on the idea that he would enter loud and angry. He entered silent and ready. Rourke raised his gun. Damien fired first. Damien fired once, and the suppressed shot snapped Rourke's shoulder sideways. The gun fell and skittered across the rug. Rourke crashed into the bookcase and grunted as he reached for a backup. Victor Harlan lifted his hands and tried to smile through sweat. He said, "This is for your protection, Damien." Damien walked forward with the pistol steady and his voice low. "Move away from my mother." Bianca Vescari stood from the desk on shaking legs, her eyes locked on Damien like she needed him to be real. Damien reached back and touched her elbow once. "Behind me, Mama," she obeyed, and the obedience cut him deeper than the betrayal. Marco flooded the study with 2 men and a rifle. He kicked Rourke's backup gun away and pinned Rourke to the floor. A zip tie snapped around Rourke's wrists. Victor tried to step toward Bianca with his palms up. Marco shoved him back and forced him to his knees. Damien did not look away from Victor. Victor whispered that Bellini forced this. Damien answered that Bellini could not force a man to betray his mother. Victor swallowed and started to cry. Damien said you would cry in court later. Rena Cole stood in the doorway, breathing hard. Her eyes moved between Bianca and Damien and the listening device overhead. She pointed again to the intercom panel, blinking red. Damien understood the house had been turned into a microphone. He told Marco to sweep every room for bugs. He told a guard to lock the gates and kill exterior lights. He told another guard to bring every staff member to the dining room now. They moved Bianca to the sitting room first. Damien walked her there himself. Her wrist was bruised where Victor held her. She tried to hide it, but Damien saw. Rena followed with the cleaning cart like a shield. Bianca poured tea with shaking hands and did not spill a drop. She looked at Rena and whispered, "Thank you." Rena nodded without speaking because her throat was tight. In the dining room, the staff gathered under bright chandelier light. The chef, 2 gardeners, a driver, a footman, a laundress. Damien watched their faces and counted the missing ones. 2 guards were not present. The night driver was not present. Rourke's assistant was not present. Marco returned with a tech specialist carrying a black case. The specialist found a pinhole camera under the mantel. He found a listening puck behind a smoke detector. He found a second one inside a wall sconce. Bianca inhaled sharply and asked how long. Marco said days at least. Damien looked at the staff again. Someone in this house had been feeding Bellini information. Victor coughed from the hallway where he sat zip-tied. He claimed the maid had no verifiable background. He said she arrived 2 weeks ago and nobody checked her. Rena stiffened and said Bianca hired her. Bianca lifted her chin and confirmed it. She said, "I hired her because she looks me in the eye." She said, "I hired her because she does not fawn." Damien did not accuse Rena. He asked Marco for the access logs. Marco returned with the result fast. The admin login at 10:12 p.m. was Rourke. The master keys were cloned under Rourke credentials. The camera loop was done under Rourke access. Victor had lied to frame her. Damien stared at Victor with calm disgust. Victor whispered that Bellini told him to sow doubt. He said Bellini wanted Damien to blame the maid. Damien said Bellini will not get what he wants. Then the estate dogs began barking hard. A thud hit the service door. Another thud followed. The alarm did not scream. It whispered through Marco's radio. North fence breach. 2 heat signatures moving toward the guest house. Damien felt the house shift into siege. He turned to Bianca. "Safe room, now!" Marco assigned 2 men to escort her. Bianca grabbed Rena's wrist. "You come too." Rena hesitated and looked at Damien. Damien nodded once. "Go, lock it from inside." They moved Bianca and Rena down the interior corridor. Damien followed Marco toward the study to coordinate response. Suppressors popped outside. A short burst of radio chatter said 2 intruders down. 1 escaped into the trees. Damien ordered them to let the runner go and track him. Then his phone vibrated. Unknown number. A video opened automatically. Bianca sat in a chair somewhere unfamiliar. Gold vine wallpaper behind her. Not his estate, a different room. Bianca's eyes were wide with fear. Bellini's voice spoke from shadow. "You came home early. Good. Bring me the maid by sunrise, or your mother stays frozen forever." Damien's blood turned to ice. He looked at Marco and said, "Check the safe room now." They ran. The safe room door was unpowered. A guard lay unconscious with a dart in his collar. The room was empty. A teacup shattered on the floor. Bianca's chair scraped marks across the tile. Damien stood still for 1 breath. Then he turned and said, "Find the tunnel, because this house is bleeding secrets." Damien walked back to the study as if his fear had been turned into steel. He did not run for the driveway. He did not shout his mother's name. He moved with the calm of a man who understood that panic was exactly what Bellini bought. Marco met him at the stairwell with 2 men and a tablet. He showed Damien the perimeter feed. North fence had been breached by 3 heat signatures. 2 were down. 1 escaped into the trees and vanished near the boathouse line. Damien said they did not take Bianca through the front door. He said they used the house bones. Marco nodded and said the safe room wing had an older construction plan attached to it, a hidden service tunnel used by the original owner. Damien ordered Marco to pull the blueprint from the county archive and the private architect files. Gideon answered on the line and said he already had them. He said there was a maintenance access behind the pantry shelving that did not appear on the renovated plans. Damien went to the pantry himself. He pushed aside canned goods and found fresh scratches on the hinges of a narrow wall panel. He opened it and smelled river damp. A ladder dropped into a narrow passage lined with old stone and rusting pipes. Marco said, "Bellini men did not discover that tunnel tonight. Someone had to know it existed. Someone had to guide them." Damien went back downstairs. Rourke was tied to a chair in the basement and awake now. His shoulder was wrapped. so he would not bleed out. Victor was zip-tied on the floor with tape over his mouth again because Marco was tired of hearing excuses. Damien stood in front of Rourke and spoke softly. "Tell me about the tunnel." Rourke tried to smile through pain and failed. He said it was built for emergencies. He said he found it years ago during a security audit and kept it hidden. He said it could lead to the boathouse and out to the marina through the service slip. Damien asked who else knew. Rourke swallowed and said Bellini. He said Bellini bought the blueprint from a former contractor and paid Rourke to test it. He said tonight was the test. Damien's eyes turned colder. "So you opened my mother's wing, you disabled the keypad, you sedated my guard, you carried Bianca into a tunnel you hid from me." Rourke did not deny it. He said Bellini promised him a seat. He said Bellini promised him a future where he did not answer to Damien. Damien nodded once and looked at Victor. He ripped the tape off Victor's mouth. Victor gasped and tried to talk fast. He said, "Bellini forced him. He said he only wanted to protect the company." Damien asked Victor one question. Who planted the listening devices? Victor hesitated. Marco slapped him once and the answer fell out. Rourke. Victor, a contractor paid through Bell Harbor Imports. Damien said, "You turned my home into a microphone." Victor cried and nodded. Damien stepped back and spoke into his phone. "Gideon, I want full surveillance on Pier 9 and every marina feed. I want the vehicle list. I want a pattern." Gideon replied that Pier 9's service shed had a blind spot, but he had headlights and thermal. 2 vans, 1 black sedan, 8 men, 1 boat warmed at the slip. Damien asked where Bianca was. Rourke said the shed. He said they would keep her alive until sunrise to force a trade. Damien asked trade for what? Rourke said the Maid. Damien froze for half a beat. He asked why. Rourke looked away and then spoke as if the truth tasted bitter. "Because she is not just a maid. Bellini wants her back. Bellini says she is his blood. Bellini says you have been sheltering his daughter under a fake name in your house." Damien felt his chest tighten. He thought of Rena's eyes and her steady warning. He thought of how she knew the intercom light, how she knew the service corridor panel, how she moved like she had grown up around threat. Marco cursed softly. "Boss, if she is Bellini's daughter, then he baited you into doubting her while he stole Bianca. He wanted you to choose wrong." Damien answered, "We do not choose." He went upstairs to the kitchen. Rena was there with her hands braced on the counter. A small bruise was forming at her temple. She had been hit when Bianca was taken. She looked up at Damien, and her face crumpled for 1 second before she rebuilt it. They took her. She whispered, "I tried to stop them." Damien nodded. "I know." Rena swallowed and said they told her her father sends regards. Damien asked if it was true. "Are you Bellini blood?" Rena closed her eyes. When she opened them, her gaze was steady and tired. "My name is Aria Bellini," she said. "I changed it because my father owns names. I came here to disappear. Bianca found me and gave me work and did not ask questions. I did not tell her because I wanted her kindness to stay clean." Damien felt anger and respect collide. "You warned me anyway," he said. Aria nodded. "Because Bianca did not deserve that. Because you did not deserve to die in your own foyer. And because I am tired of running." Damien told her Bellini wanted her traded for Bianca. Aria's voice shook once. "He will not stop," she said. "If he cannot own me, he will destroy what shelters me." Damien said, "Then we take Bianca back, and we end Bellini before sunrise." Marco entered with a bag of weapons and a printed marina map. He said Pier 9 had one entrance and one service slip behind the shed. He said Bellini men would have cameras and thermal. Damien looked at Aria. "You stay here," he said. Aria shook her head. "No," she said. "He will be looking for me. If he sees me, he will focus on me and not on Bianca. Let me choose my risk." Damien stared at her. "No bait," he said. Aria answered. "Bianca is already bait. At least let me be a choice." Damien exhaled slowly. "Fine," he said. "But you listen when I say silent." He handed her an earpiece. Aria took it with shaking fingers. Marco called Agent Sullivan and asked for federal units at Pier 9. Sullivan said he could be there, but he needed a recorded demand and proof of kidnapping. Damien said Bellini already provided both. He said, "We will give you Bellini in cuffs." The garage door lifted. Engines started without headlights. Damien stepped into the cold and looked back at his house once. He pictured Bianca's hands shaking in a chair under someone else's control. Then he looked at Aria and saw the same fear wearing a different face. He said, "We bring them home, both of them, and then we freeze Bellini forever." At 4:57 a.m., the convoy reached Pier 9 with headlights off and radios on whisper mode. The river smelled like diesel and cold iron. Sodium lamps painted the concrete orange and made every shadow look like a gun. Damien Vescari stepped out first with Marco at his shoulder. Aria stood behind them in a plain coat with her hair down to hide her face. She was breathing shallow, like she had trained herself to be quiet in fear. Damien did not touch her. He only said through the earpiece that she could stop any time and he would pull her back. Gideon's voice fed them angles. 8 men near the shed, 2 on the dock edge, 1 on the roof with a rifle. 1 camera tripod pointed at the main lane. 1 boat warmed at the slip behind the shed. Damien hated how much the setup looked like theatre. Bellini wanted the story. Bellini wanted Damien rage and Aria's submission, and Bianca tears. Damien signalled Marco, and Marco sent 2 men wide along the waterline. A third moved toward the stacked crates to flank the shed. Damien and Aria walked down the lane at a steady pace that looked like surrender. The shed door opened. Dario Bellini stepped out like a man arriving to applause. Dark coat, gloves, calm smile, 2 armed men behind him and 1 filming. His eyes landed on Aria and softened into ownership. "Aria," Bellini said, "come home." Aria stopped. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. She kept her chin up and said nothing. Bellini looked at Damien and smiled wider. "You came home early. Good. Bring me my daughter. You get your mother. Clean trade." Damien kept his voice even. "Show my mother." Bellini gestured, and the shed door opened wider. Bianca sat bound to a chair with a bruise at her wrist. Her eyes met Damien, and she tried to be brave, but her breathing shook. When she saw Aria, her face changed, recognition and grief. Aria inhaled sharply. Damien felt her body tense, and he spoke low into the earpiece. "Breathe. Stay with me." Bellini watched their faces with satisfaction. Mothers, daughters, weakness. He turned to Aria again. "You are mine by blood." Aria finally spoke. "My blood is not your ownership. My mother died proving that." Bellini's smile thinned. "Careful, I can make your new family die too." Damien raised both hands slightly and took 1 step forward like he was closing distance to negotiate. Bellini lifted his hand as if expecting a handshake. The roof rifle adjusted, and a faint red dot flickered on Damien's coat, then vanished. Damien spoke for the camera. Dario Bellini kidnapped Bianca Vescari and held her to force fraudulent transfers. Bellini laughed. "Keep filming." He nodded at the filmer. Damien stepped closer. Then he moved. He grabbed Bellini's wrist and twisted it down. Marco fired a suppressed shot toward the roofline, and the sniper dropped out of sight. Damien men hit the dock-edge guards with controlled fire into shoulders and legs. The filmer fell backward, and the camera skidded across the concrete, but kept recording. Bellini tried to wrench free. Damien shoved him into the shed doorframe and pinned him with his forearm. Bellini hissed and tried to bite. Damien's head stayed calm. He whispered, "You do not touch them again." Marco sprinted inside and cut Bianca ties. Bianca stood and swayed. Aria stepped in and caught her. Bianca grabbed Aria's wrist and held on like she was holding a lifeline. Bellini saw it and his face twisted. "You think you saved her? Blood finds blood. She will come back when you fail." Aria stepped into the doorway with Bianca behind her and spoke loud enough for the camera. "No, I will testify. I will say your name into a microphone. I will not look away." Bellini lunged toward Aria. Damien hit him with the pistol butt, and Bellini dropped to one knee. Marco zip-tied his wrists. Bellini laughed through pain and said the city would not hold him. Damien said the city is not holding you. The feds are. Sirens rose on the river road. Unmarked SUVs rolled in from both ends of the pier. Agent Sullivan stepped out with a folder and a badge and a face that did not fear Chicago names. He read charges aloud while marshals secured Bellini men. Kidnapping, wiretapping, attempted murder, bribery, conspiracy, witness intimidation, racketeering. Bellini tried to smile again. Sullivan did not react. Bianca refused the stretcher and kept Aria's hand instead. She whispered, "You stayed when fear told you to run." Aria's voice cracked once. She said, "I stayed because you were kind." Damien watched and felt the frozen part of him shift into something heavier. He had built walls for years, and a maid had saved him with one whisper. Now the whisper had become a public record. Sullivan asked Bianca if she would sign a statement. Bianca said yes, and she asked for one thing. She said, "Bring my son home early again and make him listen." Damien nodded. As Bellini was lifted to his feet, he leaned close to Damien and whispered, "This is not the end." Damien replied, "It is the end of you having choices." He looked at Aria and saw her watching Bellini with a calm that looked like steel. Aria said nothing. Her silence now was not fear. It was refusal. When the convoy turned back toward Lake Forest, the sky had begun to grey. Bianca sat beside Aria in the rear SUV with a blanket around her shoulders. Damien drove the lead car and kept one hand steady on the wheel. He knew Bellini would try one last twist before court. Bellini always did. Gideon's voice came through. "Boss, press is already moving. Bellini people are pushing a story that you kidnapped his daughter from your house. They're calling her Rena Cole on purpose. They want confusion." Damien answered, "Then we give them clarity." He said, "Get the intercom recording ready for release." He said, "Find the planted camera footage and the tunnel confession and prepare a public packet." Aria looked forward from the rear seat and asked one question quietly. "Will I be used as a headline?" Damien answered without turning around, "No, your story belongs to you. We use facts, not your pain." Bianca squeezed Aria's hand and said, "We will stand with you." The estate gates opened as daylight broke. Damien stepped out and looked at his home, locked, watched, his again, but he knew the real battle was next. Not guns. Court. By noon, the courthouse steps were wet with sleet and crowded with cameras. Damien Vescari did not like daylight, because daylight made men pretend they were clean. Still he stood beside Bianca in a dark coat and let the cameras see him without flinching. He had spent years keeping his face off headlines. Now Bellini was forcing the city to watch anyway. So Damien chose what they would watch. Agent Sullivan walked up the steps first and held a folder high. He announced the federal charges and the evidence chain. He announced that the listening devices were recovered from the Vescari estate. He announced that a tunnel was used in a kidnapping and that the security chief had confessed. Reporters shouted questions about mafia wars and private justice. Sullivan answered with one sentence: "This is not a war. This is a corruption case with victims." Aria stood a few feet behind Sullivan. No uniform, no cart, no disguise. Her hair was pinned back and her face was pale but steady. Bianca reached for her hand and Aria took it. The gesture looked small to cameras. To Damien it looked like a bridge. Bellini was brought in through a side entrance with cuffs and a smile that tried to survive. Victor Harlan arrived under guard with his suit wrinkled and his eyes swollen from crying. Rourke arrived with his shoulder bound and his jaw clenched, as if pain was a language he understood. They all avoided looking at Bianca. They all watched Damien. Inside the courtroom the air smelled of paper and old fear. A federal judge presided. Judge Kessler sat in the gallery under investigation and would not be deciding anything today. The court clerk read case numbers like they were prayers. Sullivan called Aria to the stand. Aria walked forward and took the oath without a tremor. Bellini smiled at her like a father in public. It was the most poisonous kind of performance. Sullivan asked her to state her name for the record. Aria said, "Aria Bellini." Then she added that she had lived as Rena Cole for safety. She said she changed it because her father used names as chains. Bellini attorney tried to turn that into weakness. He asked if she lied. Aria said yes. He asked if she stole. Aria said yes. He asked if she entered Damien home under false identity. Aria said yes. He smiled as if truth could be made ugly. Aria leaned toward the microphone. She said she lied to survive. She said she stole to escape. She said she entered the Vescari estate to disappear. Then she said none of that made Bellini innocent. It proved Bellini was a predator who forced a child to become a ghost. Sullivan played the intercom recording. The courtroom heard Victor's voice guiding Bianca hand to a signature line. The courtroom heard Rourke plan to shoot Damien when he spoke. The courtroom heard Bianca sob. Bellini's smile vanished. Bianca closed her eyes and held Aria's hand tighter. Sullivan presented the bugs and cameras recovered from the estate. He presented the jammer device crushed in Damien foyer. He presented the tunnel blueprint and Rourke confession. He presented the Marina camera loop. He presented Bellini video demand for the Maid. The judge did not blink. Paper stacked higher than arrogance. Bellini attorney tried one last move. He asked Aria if she had feelings for Damien. He wanted to stain her testimony as romance and manipulation. Aria answered that feelings were not evidence. She said the evidence was the audio and the devices and the payments. She said Damien could hate her and the facts would remain. She said coercion was what Bellini did, respect was what she demanded. The attorney sat down because there was nothing left that did not make him look like Bellini. Then Bianca testified. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She described being trapped in her own study with a pen forced into her hand. She described hearing her son's footsteps and knowing a gun waited for him. She described a maid whispering, "Stay silent," and saving Damien's life. She looked at Aria and said, I hired her because I saw courage. She said Bellini stole many things. He did not steal her judgment. Rourke took the stand next as a cooperating witness. He admitted jamming the house network and cloning keys. He admitted opening the tunnel and sedating guards. He named Bellini. He named payments. Victor took the stand and admitted financial laundering and the frame attempt against Aria. He cried while he spoke. The judge did not comfort him. By late afternoon, Bellini was denied bail again. A plea was offered on the most serious counts. Bellini refused at first. Then Sullivan played the part of the video where Bellini demanded Aria return by sunrise. The judge looked at Bellini and said, "You attempted to traffic a person using a mother as leverage." Bellini's jaw clenched. He accepted the plea with hate in his eyes. Outside the courthouse, the cameras rushed again. Sullivan announced the sentence, terms and forfeiture, and the protective orders. He said Bellini would never legally contact Aria again. He said any attempt would add years. He said the press would not receive Aria address or employment. He said victims would be sealed. A reporter shouted Aria name. Aria stepped forward and spoke once. She said she was not a maid who got lucky. She was a daughter who got free. She said she chose the name Cole because she built her life with work. She said she would honor her mother by living. Then she walked away without looking back. That night, Damien returned home early again. The front doors were locked. The cameras faced outward. The house was his. Bianca sat in the sitting room with tea and said, "You will not punish the staff with silence ever again." Damien agreed. Aria stood in the guest wing doorway holding a suitcase. She said she would stay until final sentencing on her terms. Damien stepped back and gave her room, always. Bianca handed Aria a small envelope. Inside was a lease for a separate apartment on the estate in Aria, name only. Bianca said, "The door locks from your side." Aria looked at Damien. "Damien said you decide when you move. You decide when you leave. You decide who stands near you." Aria nodded once. Then she said one thing. "Tomorrow morning you eat breakfast at a real table. No guards in the room, no phones. You do not live like war is the only language you speak." Damien almost smiled. He said yes. In the morning, Aria poured coffee. Bianca ate toast. Damien ate too. The house learned a new kind of quiet. Not the quiet that hides fear. The quiet that means danger is no longer in the walls.